We're continuing to walk through these 7 deadly sins, and the next sin is one that in 50 in AD 590. I keep looking over this direction because I have some notes up on my computer screen over here. Pope Gregory I revised the list. So originally there were 8 deadly sins. There were 8 capital sins. And he revised it and he consolidated this sin with what was the 8th sin. But because I'm not Catholic, I'm going to stick with the original list of 8. And I'm going to talk about the 8 deadly sins, which doesn't alliterate as well, but I think it's something good to talk about. Anyway, so this 4th sin, just keep in mind, this is a look to the future. The 8th sin is pride. So we will talk about that next Wednesday. Yes. So look for that devotion next Wednesday. But today's devotion is on sorrow and despair and despondency. And you say, is that a sin? Well, let's talk about it. 2 Corinthians says in chapter 4, starting at verse 7, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way but not crushed, perplexed but not driven to despair, persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. And I want to key in, we are afflicted in every way but not crushed, perplexed but not driven to despair. And here's, I think, the problem. Here is why despair and sorrow and despondency were highlighted. And it's because if you are in despair, what that can be reflective of is a lack of failure to trust God. When you look at when you see the politics and you feel your soul being crushed because the person that you were rooting for didn't get elected. And you say, wow, this is the end of the world. This is the end of our country. This is the end of whatever. This person got elected. And you kind of sink into despair over that. That's a failure to trust God. Because God's the one who put that authority in place. No authority is anywhere without God's consent. Another example that may sound silly, unless you're in this position, then it doesn't sound silly at all. If you're a huge sports fan, and you kind of feel yourself in a little bit of despair because they're not doing well. Like, if you're a Packers fan and you watch them get just whooped by the Saints this past weekend, and you felt despair at that, that's putting your trust in the wrong place. If you see the economy starting to crash and you start feeling despair because taxes are going up or because inflation's going up and you feel despair at that, it's trusting in the economy. It's not trusting in God to take care of things. And we could go on and on with examples of this, but that's the kind of despair I think and I hope this is talking about as a sin. Because it's despair that comes from not trusting in God. So I think at its core, the sin is not trusting in God. It's putting your trust in other things. The sin isn't necessarily the aftermath of that. And I want to put this disclaimer on here. I don't think this includes despair that comes from mental illness. So if you're struggling with depression, I don't think you're struggling with depression because your faith isn't strong enough. Okay? I think that despair, that feelings of sorrow and despondency, I think those are only a sin when they come directly from you putting your trust in the wrong place. But if you're struggling with depression, that's not why to for most people who struggle with this on a clinical level, um, it's not necessarily because your trust was in the wrong place. It's because you've gone through a trauma, or because there's something wrong. There's a chemical thing going on in your brain. It's something that's much more outside of your control. That is not like you are not a you are not having depression is not a sin. Just like having a broken leg isn't a sin. Just like having a heart attack isn't a sin. Um, so I want to make that clear. Like when I talk about this, I'm talking about depression that has come about because your trust was in the wrong place, not despair that came about because your trust was in the wrong place, not despair that's coming about because of things outside your control. If that makes sense. Yeah, I think we're good on that particular sin of the seven deadly. So, brothers and sisters, go in peace, serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.